Hello, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar on saying goodbye to the Electronic Resource Fund. I'm Felicity Dicus, Chair of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. Our presenter today is Maria Savova, the Collection Management and Digital Integration Librarian at Claremont College's library. Maria oversees the library's material budget and a number of projects related to collection management and analysis. She brings much experience to today's topic. Everyone in the audience is muted, so if you have questions for Maria, please type them into the question box on the screen. Maria will answer questions following her presentation, and if we go over time, she'll answer the remaining questions offline, and all participants will receive the answers by email. Also, please note that today's session is being recorded, so you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides. We don't have a chat function that allows you to chat with each other. But if you like, please use the Twitter hashtag on the screen, and you can chat about today's sessions. Maria and I are not monitoring that, so if you have questions, again, please use that question box. And now, here's Maria. There will be a slight delay as we switch speakers.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Maria Savova, and I'm a Collection Management and Digital Integration Librarian in the Claremont College's library. We are located in this beautiful city of Claremont, about 35 miles east of Los Angeles. We serve about 6,800 FTE students and about 800 faculty. Collection comprised of about 1 million print volumes, roughly 500,000 ebooks, some 70,000 journals, and we work with close to $5 million materials budget. In Claremont, we have a model that is quite unique for this country. We have 7 separate but geographically contiguous academic institutions that share a single library. They all contribute to the library's budget based on a formula, and in addition, some give us endowment funds. This model creates a complex budgeting situation on the funding part, but also means that on the expenditures part, there's even bigger need of tight control and rigorous reporting, because we are responsible to not one institution, but 8. Our own internal library administration, plus our constituencies in the 7 colleges, faculty, students, and administration. And they all very different, and proudly so. They all have different programs, different interests, different goals, and the task of serving them all fairly is a complex and demanding one. So why are we here today? This is not a presentation about allocating money to your existing subject funds, but rather what kind of funds your budget needs to have in order for it to fulfill its purpose. And for that, we also need to talk about what is the budget's purpose. We will look at what a library's budgets currently are and what we need them to be. I'll introduce some new concepts and hopefully have you think about library budget in a different way, to see it more as more than a way to allocate resources, but also as a tool for planning and reporting for both selectors and management. Now, budget is a very big topic. There's obviously operations budget and materials budget, and within the materials budget there are funds that are not going to materials strictly. So in the category collection support, there are funds that are designated to expenses of the sort of cataloging subscriptions, or what we pay for our ILS or discovery costs, ILL charges, etc. Today we're going to be talking about restructuring the collections part of the materials budget. So what is a budget? As a good librarian, I searched an authoritative reference source, as well as some not so authoritative ones, and I found so many definitions that touched on different aspects of what a budget is and what it should do. Opening a parenthesis here, there are also significant differences between budgets of for-profit organizations and not-for-profit, and we're obviously talking here about organizations that is not for profit. So here on the screen you see one example. I've highlighted the important keywords here, so coordination of activities, allocation of resources. Yeah, we do that mostly with our budgets, and the budget should facilitate control. There's another one here that identifies as primary functions of the budget: planning and control. Again, I'm not going to bore you with all the definitions that I went through, but I collected this nice list of functions that were identified as essential purposes of a budget. So planning, allocation, and control that we already mentioned, but also communication, visibility, and accountability. So how many of these functions are traditional libraries materials budgets really fulfill? We do use them to allocate resources, but how much we could plan and how much control we really have. And talking about visibility and accountability, we need to be able to produce all kinds of statistics quickly and easily and reliably. And to be honest, this is how the idea of restructuring the budget was born. In my previous job, I was trying to do ARL annual statistics, and there was so much expenditure questions required that I needed, for that I needed data that we were not collecting separately. Certain numbers I could get some other way, others were practically impossible. So I thought, here's a revolutionary idea. Since we know we need to do this again next year, how about we start collecting the data now? So let's take a look at what traditional materials budget looks like in the general case. This is what I found when I started working in Claremont 2 years ago. And I believe this is a typical budget structure for an academic library. If it's not, I would appreciate you giving us your perspective on this in the questions, and we'll talk about it at the end. So there are, of course, different subject or discipline categories. In Claremont's case, we have discipline budgets and not separate subject ones. But for each discipline, we had books, journals, or serials probably for some of you, standing orders, media, and electronic resources. So what is the issue here? When I was preparing for this presentation, I was wondering whether to tell you that I have an economics degree and I have even worked as an accountant for about 5 minutes. I almost decided against it because it's in fact irrelevant. What I did here is I did not address this library issue as an accountant. On the contrary, I attacked this accounting issue as a librarian. And what do I mean by that? What is the budget structure if not a classification system of a sort? And the two characteristics of a good classification system are comprehensive and mutually exclusive. While one could argue that this could be comprehensive, they are certainly not mutually exclusive. What if I had standing orders for ebooks? Are they books, or standing orders, or electronic resources? The problem with these categories is that not one but two of those things are not like the others. We have 3 material types, 1 material format, and one that represents a type of spending. And we decided to call that in Claremont nature of spending. The Electronic Resources Fund is the worst offender. We have e-journal subscription, back file purchases, full-text journal databases, primary sources, data sets, streaming media, and both ebook purchases and ebook subscriptions. A complete mixture of material types, so journals, databases, primary sources, data, media, books. Some of these are ongoing subscriptions, while others are one-time purchases. The only thing they all have in common is the material type. They're all electronic. But just to add to the confusion, not everything electronic is always purchased on the Electronic Resources Fund. Often ebook packages go on the book funds. And how about streaming media or downloadable audio and video? Are these electronic resources or media? Overall, there's too much confusion. While I understand how much keeping these things undefined provides certain flexibility, it also creates the kind of headache that we want to avoid as much as we can. So let's list the issues here. It is really hard to plan purchases of one-time resources or packages if part of the fund is committed to ongoing expenditures. How many of you need to wait till April or May or even June to purchase one-time packages or journal archives? The so-called big year-end purchases, or the vendor Christmas, as I like to call it, because you don't know how much money you will have left. What if you can know in the beginning of the year how much you could spend on back files and data sets and individual ebooks or ebook packages? Wouldn't that make your planning better? I'm often being asked by administrators and faculty what percentage of a budget is spent on subscriptions, or about the increases in our journal subscriptions. We all know they go up, some a little, most a lot, but to really project how much money we need going forward in order to maintain our purchasing power, we need to calculate the overall percentage of increase in ongoing commitments. It does not make sense to mix those with one-time purchases. They need to be planned and tracked separately. Here the example with the ebooks. Buying them from wherever there is money at the moment is just crazy. We need consistency. And last but not least, expenditures per material type is kind of obvious, but it is also probably the thing that could easily be done some other way, like reports from our ILS, for example. It is crucial for planning, though, to commit certain amount of money to certain material types. And here the best example would be print books. Our humanities faculty has this fear that we will stop buying print books and spend all the money on stuff they can't browse on the shelf. Having a fund devoted to just print books and being able to show that is important to transparency and our relationship with this faculty. Also, as I mentioned, annual surveys were one of the triggers for this project. This is some of the data we need to report annually for our Oberlin consortium. So purchases, you see they want serial back files with the books, not with the journals, because there are purchases and need to be tracked separately. Obviously, everything electronic together, so ebooks purchased on the book fund would be a problem. Media separately ongoing commitments for print and electronic, separately books and journals, etc. So mostly working from this, we figured out that in each fund we need to account for 4 different criteria: discipline, material type, nature of spending, and format. I do recognize that one of the reasons why we were able to do this is because we don't have 100 different subject funds. Claremont College's library operates within broader disciplines. We have arts and humanities, social sciences, and science and technology, with additional separate fund for Asian studies and special collections. And we have a multidisciplinary fund that is used with caution. We don't charge on that fund anything that is not truly multidisciplinary. Material format was quite easy, so we have print/physical versus electronic. Material type, however, was quite the challenge because there are so many material types and things could easily get out of control if you try and capture them all. So for this we almost went with just books, journals and databases and media. But again, because of the reports, we know we need to track separately journal expenditures. So we decided to split the journal content from the non-journal one. Newspapers came up as a question there. Are they journals? Are they not? Eventually we decided that they were more of a primary source than journal content, and we classed them with the non-journal databases. And last but not least, for me, this is one of the most important distinctions that has not received enough attention in the past: the nature of spending. It is absolutely crucial for both planning and control that we know how much money is already spent when we start the new fiscal year. Originally, we went with just one-time versus ongoing and standing orders separately. Then in year 2, which is our current fiscal year, we separated the approval plan autoship from the firm ordering as well. And the reason for that, in fact, is the most important reason why accounting for nature of spending is so crucial for planning. These top 3 funds are all the funds that spend themselves, if allocated properly, obviously. But the point is that there is no active librarian intervention required to expend those funds. They just need to be monitored, as opposed to the outright purchases that require active firm ordering to be done by librarians and staff. One category that is currently part of firm ordering is demand-driven purchases. This type of expending funds is getting more and more prominent in academic libraries, and it is expending an important part of our budgets. I believe that tracking it separately has benefits not only from the point of view of public relations and demonstrating how responsive we are to the needs of our patrons, but also from a point of view of planning. This unmediated demand-driven purchasing is yet another type of expenditure that does not require librarian intervention. And we would certainly want to budget that in advance and monitor it strictly. Now, once we had all the categories, we started putting them together. The good news is that not all the combinations work, so the final number of funds we ended up with per discipline was not as high as we were afraid it would be. And this is what we got. Within each discipline, books could be print or electronic. Print books could be firm ordered, autoship, or arrive on standing orders. For ebooks, we could have firm orders, standing orders, or ongoing subscriptions. So for example, our subscription to eBury Academic Complete would go on the ongoing ebooks fund. But if we purchased individual ebooks via YBP, for example, that would be on the firm orders fund. One more thing to mention here, with ebook packages that come with a hosting fee, the package itself would be a firm order, but the hosting fee will be ongoing, so it will be tracked on a separate fund. In Claremont, we do not include ebooks in our approval plan. If we did, we would have had ebook autoship too. And as of next year, I'm thinking another line for unmediated DDA for both print and ebooks. Moving to journals, journals could be print or electronic. The print is just ongoing, while for electronic, we could have one-time purchases of back files or archives, for example. With media, there was a question about streaming or downloadable media and whether to have that as e-media. It makes a lot of sense. In our particular case, we did not have that many orders, and we eventually decided to roll that out with the non-journal databases. But it could possibly, in your case, be tracked separately as e-media. The non-journal databases could be one-time or ongoing. And the media, in our case, was just left for physical CDs and DVDs. And we're buying so few of those that it might just make sense to have one multidisciplinary media fund and roll that all together. And this is how the fund names were put together. The first 2 letters are for the discipline, in this case, arts and humanities. The third letter is the material type, in this case, book, then nature of spending, A for autoship, and the last one is the format, which is P for print. At first we had gone with numbers, but it's so hard to remember so many numbers and also to make them meaningful enough to be able to track the connection between the different categories. Then somehow by brainstorming we got to this. And this was just brilliant because now I can devise any fund name without having to consult a list. And also the transition from the old numbers to the new names went better than expected with our staff here. And this is an aspect of the change that should not be underestimated. This is a whole list by discipline. As you can see, there aren't that many funds, and also not every discipline had every fund. So for example, for special collections, there are no e-journal subscriptions or e-books, etc. So this PowerPoint will be shared. It will be uploaded on SlideShare, so you don't need to take notes. You will be able to consult this list later on. The next step is the remapping. This is a very, very important step. It's very important to have a clear idea of where every new item should go, even more so for the people who have worked with the old funds for many years and practically do this on autopilot. For the most part, it was easy. 4 of the 5 funds mapped directly to a new one. In the case of books, in the first year we did not have the auto-ship fund, so it was just whatever it was books before, now it was books, print books, firm orders. Journals, our journal fund was only for print journals, our standing orders were mostly for print, and as I said, the media was only just for physical media. Killing the electronic resources fund, however, proved quite the undertaking. As you can see from this list, on its deathbed, the Electronic Resources Fund created 7 different funds. And some of those already had open orders for ongoing subscriptions that had to be reassigned. On the bright side, going through the list of all our open orders was a very beneficial exercise for me, particularly because I was relatively new in the institution. It helped me familiarize myself with all the resources that we had, but it also helped us spot a few errors, make some adjustments, including marking few resources for cancellation review. Okay, so that's all very good, but you probably want to know now how exactly the allocation works from here on. As I said, we're not going to be talking about subject or discipline allocation for funds. I'm sure you all have either spreadsheet with formulas or some other ways to determine the split of money per subject or discipline. In Claremont, we've had the allocations per discipline follow a historical trend, and we just get whatever percentage increase or cut split equally between the different funds. So within each discipline, however, we could start allocating per material type and format. This is just one example. It's not real numbers. And obviously, for anything that's ongoing, we already know that we have a significant chunk of money that needs to be dedicated. But we could have a plan for the rest of it and have certain targets to follow for allocating the rest of the money. Okay, so once we have those targets set, I could say I want to spend the 15% of all the money that I have for, say, arts and humanities on print books, and I want to spend 5% on e-books. And once we have those targets set, we could start drilling down. So for print books, for example, I would have those 4 different ways of spending. We always need to start the planning, obviously, from the ongoing or the auto-ship or the standing orders, or the ones that we have little or no control over. Once we know we have that covered, the ones that we have already made commitments for, we could see how much we have left for firm ordering and split that between GDA and librarian selections. Moving to the funds that support subscriptions, same logic. So for example, my total for non-journal content would be my previous year appropriation plus the budget increase percentage that I get. In order to allocate that, I need to first take care of the ongoing part, because that is already technically spent. So that will be the previous year's expense plus the overall subscription increase for my resources. And I need to add to that any additions that I've made during the fiscal year. So any new subscriptions or hosting or platform and any other ongoing fees on one-time purchases. And whatever is left will be my firm ordering fund for the material type. So this is the part that is significantly different from just having one electronic resources fund. I practically split all the money that I allocate for non-journal content, and in the beginning of the year I know how much is already committed to ongoing resources and how much I have left for one-time ordering. So technically, if you could allocate the ongoing part with a relative precision, you could know how much you can spend on packages the moment the budget is ready, not only in May. In the case of adding new subscriptions, so what we do here, because allocating the ongoing part, for allocating the ongoing part, I use the information from the previous year. That fund is allocated to spend itself. So whenever I add a new subscription, that obviously, if I put it on the ongoing fund, it will overspend my fund and throw the calculations. So what we do here is, in the first fiscal year, in the year in which we get the resource, after the budget is already allocated, we put that expense on a firm ordering fund. And then when allocating the ongoing journal fund for the next year, I move that resource to the ongoing fund and plan accordingly. So that would increase my ongoing part, not only with the percentage of overall increase, but will add that additional resource. Let me do this with a particular example. So say that in this fiscal year, I have $320,000 for non-journal databases. Out of that, my ongoing commitments come up to $310,000. And that leaves $10,000 for one-time purchases of, say, datasets or primary sources. Then I pay for my subscriptions and I spend the $10,000 on one-time stuff without adding any new subscriptions this year. But one of the databases that I purchased has a $450 hosting fee that is ongoing for the next 10 years. So what happens when I start planning for the 2015 budget? I get 2% overall budget increase, so my total gets to $326,400. The ongoing part will be what I spent last year, $310,000, plus the overall inflation of non-journal databases, which is about 4.5%. It is great if you can calculate that more precisely based on historical data from your particular set of resources. Obviously, that's a very labor-intensive process. I will try and do it this year, but for the purpose of this example, let's just use 4.5%. And to that, I will need to add that additional ongoing cost for hosting the new database, $450. And my ongoing total for 2015 gets to $324,400, which leaves only $2,000 for firm ordering next year. So this is a great and very simple demonstration of how the difference between budget increase and actual inflation is diminishing our purchasing power. Our cushion is melting. So as you see in the previous year, my firm ordering part was 3.13% of the amount I have for non-journal databases. And that's melting to only 0.6% in 2015. It is evident that not only I won't be able to buy almost any one-time resources in 2015, but in 2016, without additional funding or redirecting money from, say, books, I'd have to start canceling ongoing resources, even though my budget is technically increasing, and even though I did not actually add any subscriptions. I know this is not obvious to our funding parties, and showing them a calculation like this could help explain what is happening. So no matter how much of this is directly applicable to your institution or how much you plan on implementing, I hope I managed to convince you that planning and controlling our budget expenditures in a transparent and consistent way is essential. And modifying our materials budget structure to account for the three critical aspects of library materials expenditure, in addition to discipline or subject, could give us the tools we need in order to succeed. And I see that I totally rushed through it, and we have a lot of time for questions.
Maria, we have gotten several questions.
Okay.
Let's start from the top.
Okay.
On your examples of data, we give some examples of journal databases that fit in that category.
Going back to journal databases here.
Right. Yeah. What?
So examples of journal databases. Well, anything like academic search, Premier or Complete, for example. The JSTORs archives are practically, yeah, they called archives, but they're also ongoing. Even something like Web of Science that is only indexing, but that's a journal database. And then non-journal databases would be anything that's data or music or art store or newspaper databases, something like this. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. And if it doesn't, please send some more in. How many, we talked about your funds. How many did you have before you revised it? And you again, how many you had afterwards?
So we had, before we revised it, we had, oops, let me go back. So we had those 5 for the 3 different disciplines. So that's 15. And then we had for, I think for Asian studies, we also had all those, and for special collections, we probably had books and journals, at least. I mean, I have to go back and look, but we had for the different disciplines that I mentioned here. For almost all of them, we had books, journals, standing orders, media, and electronic resources. And at the end, we ended up, so this is the most exhaustive list, but so that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So we don't have all 12 for all the disciplines. As I said, for Asian studies and for special collections, we don't have all of those. We don't have all for multidisciplinary. There's something that I don't mention here because it probably does not apply for everyone, but we also have prepaid funds because we are on accrual accounting. So when we pay for resources that cover resources which term does not coincide with our fiscal year. So for example, our fiscal year is from July to June, but when we pay for resources that are from January to December, half of what we pay is technically prepaid for the next fiscal year. So some of the invoices that we pay are put on special prepaid funds. So those are additional. But I think we ended up with about 70 different funds. I would really need to, I could double check and answer that question by email later on, but it was not an overwhelming list. First, when we started planning it, people were quite scared that we're going to end up with huge list, but in fact, the fact that we don't have separate history and philosophy and business and sociology fund actually made it more manageable.
So was there a substantial difference from what you had before and what you have now in the number of fund codes?
Yeah, we ended up with significantly more fund, but I think it made our work easier because before we tried to figure out what part of the money spent on a particular fund referred to what exactly, while now, since we allocate and we charge a particular resource exactly on a fund that's quite clear what it is for, it makes our work much easier. It makes our reporting easier. It makes our planning easier. But yeah, we did end up with higher number of funds eventually. Yeah.
Okay. Since you have this screen up now, was there a what was your thinking in the order of the categories you put in your fund code? So you started with discipline and then material type.
I think that came from before we had numbers for the fund. So for example, I think 93 was books, so it was arts and humanities. 93 was books and arts and humanities. So that was just left over from the way we worked before. We didn't completely change absolutely everything, though some acquisitions people might disagree. But yeah, there's no reason why you might decide to do it differently. You could start with book, print, or print book. There's really no reason why this can't be arranged in a different way, but having it as letters really helps. So I could say, okay, what would be my social sciences fund for non-journal databases? It will be SSNOE, because it's social sciences, non-journal, ongoing, electronic. And it's, once you figure out what your order will be, it's really easy to construct those funds, and you don't need to memorize every name separately.
Good. Yeah, it's very logical. Okay. Do you purchase anything consortially? And if you do, where does that fit in the budget?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Do you purchase anything consortially? Or do you purchase everything consortially?
So we have a consortium of colleges, but the library is just one library. So this is what is specific for us. We don't purchase anything for individual colleges. We don't license anything separate. Everything that the library licenses or purchases is for all our institutions. So we are just single library. From the point of view of the library, we serve a medium-sized doctoral university. They are separate colleges, but it's all, from our point of view, it's all one. Everything we purchase is available to all of them. So from that point of view, as a library, we're not a consortium. Now, for purchasing with other members of our library consortia, so we're part of SCELC and we're part of Oberlin, but anything we license is we just get a consortial discount, but we do license only for our users. So we don't do any consortial purchases per se.
Okay. Now, what do you do with reference purchases and purchases for general things like New York Times or local newspaper? What categories are those assigned to?
A newspaper
what
that
discipline?
yeah, so that would be multidisciplinary, anything that's reference or some of those, like a big newspaper database that covers all sorts of disciplines, would go on a non-journal ongoing fund if it's a subscription. If we have some journals that are specifically social science, like business journals, or if we have newspapers, I'm sorry, if we have newspapers that are specific to a discipline, then they would go on the discipline non-journal fund. But things like New York Times or a whole database that covers multiple newspapers in many different discipline areas would be multidisciplinary. So those are the only kind of things that we charge on multidisciplinary fund. If we have a resource, so for example, eBury Academic Complete, that one could say is multidisciplinary, but we do have this split, so certain percentage goes on arts and humanities, percentage on social sciences and science and technology based on the disciplinary split of the content within the package. Because we want as much as possible to be able to say how much money we spend on each discipline. Does that answer?
Okay. There's a couple of questions about budget amounts. What do you do if you don't receive budget increases?
Well, obviously, if you don't receive increases, you have to work within the money that you have, and so this is the moment where you need to decide what to do. So obviously, if you don't receive any increase, and this year you spend 50% of your money on journals, and your cushion for one-time resources is very small, this is a decision time. You're either going to cut your books and allocate more money to journals next year, or bigger percentage of your diminishing budget in order to keep all your subscriptions, so you have to do cancellations. But doing it this way makes it very transparent and really shows your users, your faculty, your students, your funding parties that this is happening. Because if everything is all together, it's kind of, yeah, you just buy fewer books, but it kind of goes unnoticed as long as you keep all your subscriptions. This way, if you want to keep the percentage of the budget that you dedicate on books, it becomes very clear how you can either not keep all your ongoing subscriptions, or you need infusion in there to keep up with inflation.
Here's a question that has something to do with that. So even with your more precise categories, wouldn't you still have problems of leftover funds if inflation was too high and you budgeted too much, or you underspent throughout the year?
So that's what the monitoring part is about. So for example, we have this issue right now because we allocated our auto-ship, print book auto-ship based on how our approval plan was going last year. And then in November, we made some changes to our approval plan. So we have some amount of money that we expected to be spent on auto-ship, but it will not be spent. So what we're doing now, when we, obviously in regular intervals, you need to monitor the funds that are supposed to spend themselves and know how they should be going. If you know that you've paid all your subscriptions that you expect for the year and you still have money left, then you know that you have not allocated properly. So it is not an exact science as much as we want it to be. Even if you've gone through every open order and you've calculated the percentage increase as precisely as possible, there could always be you receive an invoice and there's 25% increase, and they've been increasing it 3% the previous 5 years. Or you just cancel something and you have some money left. So you deal with those the way we've always been dealing with. Around this time of year you make adjustments, but at least doing this from the beginning of the year gives you way more flexibility earlier in the year to make plans. I hope I answered that. Hello?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Here's a question about the process you went through. When did you start your budget rehab process, and how long did the process take?
So the longest of the whole process, obviously the planning, I had spent a lot of time thinking about this long before I ever hoped to be able to do it. But the moment we decided to actually work on this, I think it was sometime in the spring, so maybe around this time, April, maybe it was even May, and we had it done for the next fiscal year that started July. So what took the longest time was reading through the list of our open orders. We had this pages and pages of spreadsheet with electronic resources, and we had to go through all this and say, okay, is this a journal or is it a non-journal resource? So each one of those had to be reallocated or split. Or is this an ebook package? So this is this part, going from the electronic resources to all those separate funds. So obviously the answer will depend on how big your library is and how many ongoing resources you have. Other than that, the part of remapping the rest was really not that much of an issue. Before we had a number that represented print journals. After that it was a combination of letters. Not a big deal, we reassigned those. It took probably quite a long time for our acquisition staff to go into each order record and change it. That part I recognize probably took quite a long time. But as from the planning stage, really this was the process that we're the most worried about. But I would argue that this is something that needs to be done eventually, and each year we struggle with, when we need to do our statistics, we struggle of trying to figure out what parts of the electronic resources fund are spent on all those things anyway. So we could delay it, but eventually we need to do this.
So in your system, you entered the codes manually?
I imagine for those funds, the change of the funds, I'm not sure about that, and some of my colleagues who worked on this are actually watching, so I don't want to make statements that are wrong. They're probably laughing right now. But yeah, you might want to send me that question, and I will consult with them. I imagine that some of those straightforward changes, probably the systems have the capacity to do automatically, but for all these, things probably had to be done manually. And so you don't need to do this all at once. Probably you could go, because you do renewals around that time anyway. So our acquisition staff need to go into each order record when they do renewals. So probably at that time you could also change the fund. So it all depends on your workflows, on your renewal times, and when exactly your next budget allocation is due. So those all will be things that depend on the local conditions. Okay. But yeah, it is very labor intensive to do it once, but since that moment it's been working well.
Here is a question. We are considering purchase of data sets for the first time. We have no additional funds for this type of purchase. Would you suggest deducting the cost of data sets from e-journals, databases, or what?
So for us, data sets are non-journal expense. And in fact, in here they would go into the last fund, which will be firm. Because usually data sets are one-time sources. There are also subscriptions for that, but if you don't have the extra funding, you need to get it from somewhere. So how would you deduct it from your journals? If you don't have additional funding, you would have to cancel a journal, or if you have leftovers in your electronic resources funds, you could just dedicate part of that. If you know that each year, at the end of the year, you usually have, I don't know, $50,000 to spend on year-end purchases, you could start by allocating part of that to data sets, and you will know that you usually have this left over even if you don't plan your ongoing precisely. But this is the point that I'm trying to make, is if in the beginning of the year you know how much your ongoing commitments will eat out of your electronic resources fund, then you know how much you have left for one-time purchases, and that you could just put in a separate fund for one-time purchases from the beginning of the year, and have your selectors know that they could spend from this fund on this type of resources.
Okay. Some questions about your discipline categories. Your discipline categories are very broad. How do you negotiate allocations with your faculty in competing departments? And another question was about how you allocate those funds among the disciplines.
So we haven't had a review of the percentages between those disciplines in a long time, way longer than I have been here. So from what I know, those are the historical. So when, I don't know how many years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I have to double check that. I think 2007 was the last time when we had subject funds, and when they decided to merge the funds into disciplines, they just merged those subjects fall into arts and humanities, so whatever was last year for those funds will be now arts and humanities, and those subjects fall into social sciences. And from there on, we have just been taking the previous year, adding the budget increase that we're getting. So they keep, as proportions from the budget, they keep this historical trend. Now, changing those proportions would, it's probably a good idea to do a review and to see what, if those allocations are still appropriate, and that's a subject of a different discussion, obviously, and would probably involve our faculty, but we have not done it at this point. Now, as to negotiating between subjects, we've been doing that. So part of that is the approval plan. So we know the approval plan is bringing certain amount of books per LC class that falls into the discipline, and then we have the subject specialists within the disciplines that do some ordering. It's definitely not as precise as having separate funds for each subject, but nowadays there's so much interdisciplinarity happen. Even for books, I've done cataloging for a short period of time, and assigning call number was one of the hardest things I had to do, because there were so many areas where subjects go, the book goes across subjects. It's even more difficult with electronic resources, with packages. So I think nowadays the narrower subjects are less important than they've been in the past, and this disciplinary approach has been working well for us since we are relatively small institution. It might not be the same for bigger libraries, but it is something that obviously each library needs to decide whether it works for them or not.
Maria, how many subject areas did you have before you reduced it to 6 disciplines?
Oh, I would have to check that, but it wasn't a huge list. I think we had somewhere between 7 and 10, maximum 10 per discipline. So I think for the 3 different disciplines, they might have been a total of 20, 25, but I need to double check that because, as I mentioned, this was before I worked here, but I think I have some old lists somewhere, so I could double check and confirm.
That was a big change then.
That was a big change at a time, and I guess now people are used to it or not. I don't know.
Can you comment on your budget forecasts when vendors offer bundle prices, like free hosting with paid content, but you don't know how much exactly you'll pay for all the products individually the following year until that last possible invoice date? So you're getting, bundled prices, but you're not sure the end price.
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean
the vendor offers a bundled price, like free hosting with paid content, but won't tell you how much exactly you'll pay for all the products individually the following year.
Well, as much as possible, I would avoid not knowing what something's going to cost me. I never get those cable offers for $10 this year, but we're not going to tell you how much you're going to pay next year. I know sometimes it's not possible, but we always try and negotiate some kind of agreement of how much, at least in the next several years, how much we're going to be paying. Yeah, as I said, it's not an exact science. Sometimes things go up way more than what we expected. We have to do adjustments on the go. But as I said, if I'm getting a new resource, either one time or subscription during the year, within this fiscal year, I only look at my firm funds. So for example, here, we're adding right now a small, inexpensive journal in Latin American studies or something, no, Latin American cinema. And within this year, we're going to pay it on our firm journal fund because it is a new expense that I did not plan for when I submitted the budget last July. When I plan the budget for next year, I'm going to look at what I spent on journals in arts and humanities. I'm going to add the percentage of increase that we expect, and then I'm going to add that journal increase with the percentage of increase that I expect. So those expectations, as always, will be different than what we planned. Sometimes we get better deals than we expected. Most times it's more expensive. That's why around this time we look at how our spendings are going and we make adjustments. But definitely with this approach, the amount of adjustments we need to make is smaller than if we just had one big pot of money. And I think we
have a lot of questions left, so I'll be sending those to Maria. Let me give you one last question.
Okay.
In your presentation, you said, and I don't know if it was an example, you took $8,000 from the book fund in fiscal year 2015. So how much will you have left in fiscal year 2016?
Are we talking about this? So this is a non-journal databases example, and it's not a real example. I just took some numbers, and it really depends. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to say with this is this makes very transparent whether we keep on eating from the book money or we just allocate to journals and non-journal content more than what our ongoing subscriptions are, and use that difference specifically for one-time resources in journals or one-time resources in non-journal content. This is the part that is transparent, because I know in the past in this institution and in my previous job, and I've heard from colleagues from other institutions, is if you don't spend your book money, you could buy a database with whatever's left. So this is not a transparent way to do collection development. And obviously you better buy something if that's what's needed, but it needs to be planned and reported accordingly. I don't know if I answered that particular question, but feel free to include it in the email and I'll do my best to answer it.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. It was
Thank
interesting
you.
just to hear about your situation with the multiple libraries, but just how you redid your budget and issues you faced. So for everyone, we just found today's session useful, and I think just based on the questions, there was a lot of thinking. So you will soon receive a short online evaluation form. So please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return that to us. The committee uses that to plan future events. We have several opportunities coming up still this year. So several webinars that go through June. So I invite you to sign up for these. We have some cataloging, MOOCs, more e-resource preservation ones coming up. ALCTS also offers e-forums, 2-day email discussions, one this month on shared print stories, and web courses, which last 4 to 6 weeks and include homework and online instruction. So please send ideas on the evaluation form or to the ALCTS office. I want to also thank Mary Aycock and Vicki Brzezinski for providing technical support. The support we get from our technical support subcommittee makes it possible for us to present these webinars. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will join us at other ALCTS continuing education offerings in the future.